That night, amid clinking champagne flutes and bursts of confetti, my mother ripped the necklace from my throat. The gemstone shattered across the polished hardwood floor. My father frowned. "Why bring cheap trash to a family event?" My sister burst out laughing. "Cheap junk." They didn't know that necklace was my grandmother's last heirloom and the evidence I needed to end their power games. Right in the very elite circles they worshipped. My name is Maya Whitaker, and I should have known better than to wear grandmother's necklace to the family honors gala. But some part of me, the stubborn part that still believed in belonging, had fastened that delicate chain around my neck like armor. The Whitaker house blazed with light that October evening, every window a golden rectangle against the Blue Ridge Mountains. Inside, the annual charity event my parents hosted was already in full swing. Crystal clinked. Laughter rippled through rooms that smelled of lilies and aged bourbon. My father, Victor Whitaker, worked the crowd with surgical precision, the same skill that made him Asheville's most sought-after cardiac surgeon and philanthropist. My mother, Meredith, CEO of Tri-Summit Health, held court near the marble fireplace, her silver hair catching light like a crown. "And here's our marketing genius." Mom's voice cut through the murmur as my sister Sloane appeared at the top of the stairs. Sloane descended like she was accepting an award, her smile camera ready. At 31, she'd just landed a massive campaign for Nimbus Social. The room erupted in applause. I stood near the French doors, fingering the pendant at my throat. The antique setting held a diamond wrapped in blown glass, unusual, delicate, irreplaceable. Grandmother Evelyn had worn it in faded photographs from the 1950s, back when she'd been one of Asheville's first female metalworkers. My mother's voice had that particular edge disapproval wrapped in silk. She materialized beside me, her gaze fixed on my necklace. "That doesn't match the dress code." "It's Grandmother Evelyn's. It looks—" She paused, her manicured fingers reaching out. "Inappropriate for tonight's donors." Before I could step back, her hand closed on the chain. One sharp yank. The clasp dug into my neck, breaking skin. I heard myself gasp, then the terrible sound of metal snapping, glass hitting wood. The pendant struck the floor and exploded into fragments, the diamond skittering under someone's heel. The room went silent. Then Sloane's laugh cut through like broken glass itself. "God, Maya, cheap junk from your little craft shop." Blood trickled warm down my neck. My father approached, examined the damage with clinical detachment. "You're bleeding. But really, Maya bringing costume jewelry to an event like this. Costume jewelry. The necklace I'd watched grandmother repair a dozen times, her weathered hands steady over the workbench. The one thing she'd left specifically to me, not to the daughter who'd built a healthcare empire or the son-in-law who saved lives, but to the granddaughter who'd sat for hours learning to shape silver. I knelt, gathering fragments. The blown glass had shattered into dust and splinters. The diamond real, despite what they assumed lay scratched. The setting, twisted beyond recognition. My hands shook as I collected each piece into my clutch. "Leave it," my mother said. "The staff will clean up." I stood slowly, blood still wet on my collar. The room had returned to its choreographed gaiety. Conversations resumed. Champagne poured, as if nothing had happened, as if destruction could be swept away with the canapé plates. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice steady despite the rage building cold and precise in my chest. I left through the French doors, into the October night. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, bright and dismissive. Artists, so dramatic about everything. In my car, I pressed tissues to the cut on my neck and studied the fragments in my palm. The overhead light caught what remained of the glass, throwing tiny rainbows across my hands. They thought it was cheap, worthless, like my work, my choices, my entire life outside their prescribed path. I started the engine, fragments safe in my clutch. If value to them meant nothing more than image and perception, then I would turn their own currency against them. I would make them pay in the only denomination they understood: public shame. The drive home to River Arts District took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to transform grief into strategy, hurt into purpose. By the time I pulled into my studio's gravel lot, I knew exactly what I needed to do. They'd shattered something irreplaceable. Now I would shatter something of theirs, their carefully maintained facade, right where everyone they cared about could see. Growing up in the Whitaker household meant living in a museum of achievements. Every wall displayed someone's excellence: my father's medical honors, my mother's business magazine covers, Sloane's debate trophies multiplying like ambitious rabbits. My single art award from high school looked lonely between Sloane's valedictorian medal and her Princeton acceptance letter. But Grandmother Evelyn's workshop was different, hidden in the basement of her Montford home. It smelled of flux and silver polish, machine oil and possibility. While my parents groomed Sloane for boardrooms, I spent afternoons learning to anneal copper, to bezel set stones, to coax beauty from raw metal. Metal has memory, Grandmother would say, heating silver until it glowed salmon pink. Bend it wrong. It remembers. Heat it right. It forgives and becomes something new. She taught me everything: how to read hallmarks, judge stone quality, create settings that looked delicate but held firm. Her hands, spotted with age and scarred from decades of work, moved with absolute certainty. She'd been one of the first women admitted to the Southern Highland Craft Guild in 1948, back when female metalworkers were curiosities. "Your mother thinks I wasted my education," she told me once, examining a ring through her loupe. "Got a chemistry degree from Sweet Briar, then chose to make jewelry, but I knew what fed my soul." After college, UNC Asheville, not Ivy League like Sloane, I shocked everyone by opening Hearth and Hammer in the River Arts District. The converted warehouse space cost my entire savings plus a loan that made my father wince. But walking into that raw space, seeing the potential for workbenches and display cases, I felt what Grandmother must have felt choosing her path. My parents' reaction was predictable. During a family dinner 6 months after my studio opened, my mother passed around her iPad showing Sloane's latest Nimbus social campaign while my father discussed his new surgical technique publication. "And Maya's little craft project is coming along," my mother added, like mentioning a child's finger painting. "Though we should discuss sustainable career paths. Meredith Henderson's daughter just joined McKinsey. I have a 3-month waitlist for custom pieces." I interrupted. "Hobbyists always do well initially," my father said, cutting his salmon with surgical precision. "But handicrafts aren't a career. They're what people do on Etsy between real jobs." Handicrafts. As if the 16-hour days perfecting my technique meant nothing. As if the customers who cried receiving their custom wedding bands were participating in some elaborate pretense. The necklace that had been my 18th birthday gift from Grandmother Evelyn, 2 months before she died. She'd presented it with an old leather folder containing the original 1950s appraisal and a yellowed newspaper photo from the Asheville Citizen-Times showing her wearing it at the Southern Highland Craft Guild exhibition. "This is yours now," she'd said, fastening it around my neck. "Your mother won't understand its value. She sees worth only in market price. Your father measures success in lives saved, but you understand what hands can create, what memory means." The diamond wasn't large, barely a carat, but the setting was extraordinary. Grandmother had pioneered the technique of suspending stones in hand-blown glass spheres, creating an effect like capturing light in ice. Museums had wanted to acquire her pieces. She'd refused every offer. "Let them copy the technique," she'd say, "but this one stays in the family." After she died, I wore it only for special occasions. Opening night at my studio, the day I sold my first 5-figure commission. And tonight, the Family Honors Gala, hoping somehow it might bridge the gap between who they wanted me to be and who I was. Now, the necklace lay in fragments on my workbench, lit by the adjustable lamp I used for detail work. I photographed each piece, cataloging the destruction with the same precision my father documented surgical procedures. The main stone had a fresh chip. The glass had powdered in places, leaving only sharp edges. The gold setting looked like someone had taken pliers to it, which, essentially, my mother had. I pulled out the leather folder, spreading the old appraisal beside the wreckage. 1 diamond, old European cut, approximately 0.9 carats, set in experimental glass and gold mounting. Custom piece by Evelyn Whitaker. Insured value, $800. In 1956 dollars. The newspaper clipping showed grandmother at 26, wearing the necklace while demonstrating metalwork techniques, her face focused and serene. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Stop being dramatic. We'll buy you a proper necklace from Cartier." I set the phone aside and opened my laptop, beginning the documentation that would end their games. They thought craft was lesser than commerce. That memory meant less than market value, that anything made by hands was inherently cheap. They were about to learn how much cheap junk could cost them. The open studio event was scheduled for the first Friday in November, part of the River Arts District's monthly art walk. I'd spent weeks preparing new pieces displayed on custom steel stands, lights adjusted to catch every surface, local wine and cheese arranged on reclaimed wood tables. The space looked exactly as I'd envisioned when I'd first signed the lease 3 years ago. By 7:30 p.m., the studio thrummed with warmth despite the mountain chill outside. Fellow metalworkers from neighboring studios examined my techniques. Collectors who'd followed my work since the beginning discussed commissions. A young couple held hands while studying wedding band designs, their faces soft with possibility. "Maya, this new collection is extraordinary," said Thomas, who ran the ceramic studio next door. "That tension between industrial and organic, it's like you're having a conversation with the metal itself." I thanked him, but kept checking my phone. Nothing from my family. Not even Sloane, who usually at least sent an emoji when she couldn't make something. At 8 p.m., I knew they weren't coming. The confirmation arrived in the family group chat at 8:15. Dad, surgery ran late. Next time. Mom, quarterly board meeting prep. Saw the photos Sloane posted. Cute setup. Sloane, campaign launch crisis. But your little rings look nice. Little rings. Cute setup. As if 3 months of preparation meant nothing more than a child's tea party. Marcus, a longtime client and local gallery owner, noticed my expression. Family. They had other commitments. He studied the collection again, particularly a necklace that incorporated recycled vintage watch parts into a flowing design. Their loss. This is museum-quality work. Maya, you know that. Right. But knowing and feeling were different things. After the guests left at 10 p.m., I sat alone in my studio, surrounded by work that strangers appreciated more than my own blood. The wine tasted bitter. The cheese had gone dry. The carefully adjusted lights illuminated an empty space that felt suddenly too large, too quiet. My phone buzzed. Another message from my father. "We need to discuss sustainable directions for your studio. Free for lunch. Tuesday." I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when suggesting I consider medical school, law school, business school, any school that would transform me into someone worthy of the Whitaker name. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived via courier. Inside, my mother's assistant had compiled a 30-page document titled Alternative Career Pathways Leveraging Artistic Background for Corporate Success. Sticky notes in my mother's handwriting marked specific sections, marketing director tracks, creative consulting opportunities, MBA programs accepting non-traditional backgrounds. The final page was a job listing from Nimbus Social, highlighted in yellow, a sticky note in Sloane's handwriting. "I could put in a word you'd be amazing at social media content creation, real salary, benefits, actual future." I called Sloane. She answered on the third ring, voices and music in the background. "Maya, did you get Mom's package? The Nimbus position is perfect. You could do all your craft stuff as a side hustle." "It's not a side hustle. I have a business. I have clients." "Right, but like, a real job." I hung up. The next text came from my mother. "Don't be stubborn." "The Family Honors Gala is in 2 weeks. We'd love to introduce you to the Henderson's son. He's in venture capital, very interested in art as investment. The Family Honors Gala, their annual charity event where they showcased their success to Asheville's elite while raising money for causes that photographed well in society pages. Last year, they'd raised $300,000 for a new hospital wing. My studio opening had raised $8,000 for youth arts education, but that hadn't made any papers. I typed back, "I'll be there." Wonderful, wear something appropriate. Not your usual bohemian style. And please, no handmade jewelry. This is a serious event. No handmade jewelry. At an event ostensibly celebrating family achievements, my actual achievements were unwelcome, but Grandmother Evelyn's necklace that would be different. It was vintage, historical, had a story that even their crowd would appreciate, a connection to family legacy that predated their current success. I pulled out the leather folder again, running my finger over the newspaper photo. Grandmother stood at her workbench, wearing the necklace while demonstrating her glass suspension technique to other guild members. The caption read, "Mrs. Evelyn Whitaker pioneers innovative setting technique at Southern Highland Craft Guild Workshop." She'd been a pioneer, an artist, a craftsperson whose work had outlasted decades. And in 2 weeks, I'd wear her greatest piece to my parents' gala, a quiet rebellion wrapped in family history. I didn't know then that they would destroy it, that my mother's hands would snap the chain and shatter the glass, that my father would call it costume jewelry while my blood dripped onto their imported marble floor. But perhaps some part of me suspected. Because I spent those 2 weeks not just preparing for the gala, but documenting everything, every dismissive text, every suggestion I abandoned my craft, every moment they chose Sloane's corporate success over my artistic achievements. The evidence file grew thicker each day. By the night of the gala, it was almost as complete as the necklace was whole. Almost. Back in my studio after the gala, I worked methodically. First, the wound a shallow gash where the clasp had torn skin. I cleaned it with antiseptic, watching pink water swirl down the sink. The cut would scar, a thin line to remember this night by. Then, the evidence. I spread a black velvet cloth on my workbench and arranged the fragments like a crime scene. The overhead magnifying lamp revealed details invisible to the naked eye, stress fractures in the gold where it had been yanked. Glass ground to powder, the diamond's new chip catching light like an accusation. I photographed everything. Wide shots showing the complete destruction, macro images of individual damage points, the twisted clasp still bearing a speck of my blood. Each image time-stamped, uploaded to multiple cloud services. At 2:15 a.m., I drove to Blue Fern Appraisals in downtown Asheville. Despite the hour, Robert answered my call. We'd known each other since I opened my studio, and he understood the importance of documentation in our trade. "Jesus, Maya," he said, examining the remains under his microscope. "This wasn't accidental. The torque required to twist setting gold like this." He pulled up the original appraisal I'd brought. "This matches the 1956 documentation. Same stone, same unique setting technique. Current market value for vintage Evelyn Whitaker pieces runs $15,000 to $20,000. But the historical significance, this is museum-grade provenance." He prepared a detailed report, photographs, technical analysis, comparison with the original documentation. The glass suspension technique, he noted, was revolutionary for its time. Only 12 documented pieces exist, now 11. "Will you testify to this if needed?" "Absolutely." He sealed the fragments in evidence bags, each labeled and cataloged. "This is deliberate destruction of documented artwork. That's not just personal, it's cultural vandalism." My next stop was unexpected but necessary. The Whitaker house employed Century View security for all their events, I knew, because my mother had bragged about their comprehensive coverage protecting her art collection. If cameras covered the main hall, they'd captured everything. I drafted a spoliation letter on my phone, a simple legal notice requiring preservation of evidence. "Please preserve all video footage from the Family Honors Gala. October 15th, between 8 and 10 p.m. relating to an incident involving property destruction. Formal request to follow. I sent it to CenturyView's legal department in my parents' home security email. Even if they tried to delete footage now, the request created a paper trail. By 4 a.m., I was home, sorting through grandmother's papers. There, the Asheville Citizen-Times archives had digitized their old issues. The 1956 photo was clearer online than in my yellowed clipping. Grandmother Evelyn stood at her workbench, the necklace gleaming at her throat, surrounded by other craft guild members watching her demonstration. The article described her innovation. Mrs. Whitaker's technique of suspending precious stones in hand-blown glass spheres represents a fusion of scientific precision and artistic vision. The method, which she developed after studying both chemistry and metalwork, creates an effect of captured light that traditional settings cannot achieve. I found 3 more mentions in craft journals, 2 museum catalog references, and a letter from the Smithsonian inquiring about acquiring her pieces for their permanent collection. Grandmother had declined, noting she preferred her work to remain lived with rather than looked at. At 5:30 a.m., exhaustion pulled at me, but I had one more task. Through the River Arts District's Artist Association, I had access to pro bono legal consultation, a service funded by established artists for emerging ones. I booked the first available slot with Jennifer Reeves, who specialized in intellectual property and artist rights. By the time I met her at 9 a.m., I'd compiled everything into a comprehensive file. She reviewed it over coffee, her expression sharpening as she absorbed each detail. "Conversion, that's the legal term for destroying someone else's property," she said. "But this goes beyond simple property damage. There's intentional infliction of emotional distress, given the documented sentimental value, trespass to chattel, and with the video evidence." "I don't want money," I interrupted. "I want accountability, public accountability." She studied me over her glasses. "You want them to face consequences in their own arena, social consequences. They destroyed something irreplaceable because they deemed it worthless. Because my work, my grandmother's work, our family's artistic legacy means nothing to them unless it generates profit or prestige. And you want to use their own values against them. Every family has its currency. Theirs is reputation." Jennifer smiled sharp, understanding. "Then let's discuss how to make this very, very expensive for them. Not in dollars, but in the only wealth they truly value, their public image." She pulled out a legal pad, began sketching strategy. "First, we secure that video through formal discovery request. Then, we create a timeline that demonstrates pattern behavior, the dismissal of your work, the destruction of property, the attempt to minimize. We don't file immediately. We give them one opportunity to make this right on your terms. And if they refuse, then we ensure everyone in their social circle knows exactly who they are when they think no one's watching. The video, the appraisal, the historical significance it tells a story even their donors can't ignore." I thought of my mother's perfect parties, my father's humanitarian awards, Sloane's carefully curated image as a female leader in tech. They'd built their entire lives on perception. Time to show everyone what lay beneath the polish. The plan crystallized over 3 sleepless nights, each element precisely calibrated like setting a stone. I called it shattered glass, not revenge, but reckoning. First, the video. CenturyView responded to my preservation request within 48 hours, confirming footage existed. Jennifer filed a formal discovery request, citing property destruction and assault. The cut on my neck elevated this beyond simple vandalism. Within a week, we had it crystal clear footage of my mother yanking the necklace, the pendant exploding against marble, Sloane's laughter echoing through 8 different audio channels. "This is gold," Jennifer said, reviewing the footage. "The angle captures everything: your mother's deliberate grab, your father's dismissive expression, Sloane's mockery. No jury would see this as accidental." But I didn't want a jury. I wanted an audience. The second element fell into place when Marcus from the gallery called. "The Ashridge Museum of Applied Arts wants to discuss a potential exhibition. They're launching a series on generational craft traditions. Perfect timing. I proposed something different, a single-night exhibition called Shattered, Not Cheap, featuring pieces created from the destroyed necklace fragments, accompanied by the full documentation of both its creation and destruction. The museum director, Patricia, understood immediately. "This is about value systems," she said, examining my portfolio. "What we preserve versus what we discard. Yes, we'll host the opening on November 28th. November 28th, the same night as Tri-Summit Health's Autumn Gala. My mother's crown jewel event where she announced yearly initiatives to healthcare investors. I scheduled our exhibition to end at 8 p.m., giving me just enough time to arrive at their gala for the 9 p.m. presentations. The third piece required delicate engineering. I spent 2 weeks creating new pieces from the fragments not repairing, but transforming. The diamond, despite its chip, became the center of a brooch where the damage was highlighted, not hidden, surrounded by twisted gold that looked like frozen lightning. The glass dust was mixed with resin and cast into new forms, each containing a fragment of the original, each beautiful in its brokenness. Robert from Blue Fern Appraisals provided technical documentation for each transformation, establishing clear provenance from the original piece. We created a detailed catalog showing the necklace's journey from Grandmother Evelyn's workshop to its destruction to its resurrection. Then came the letter. Jennifer and I drafted it together, each word considered "Dear Victor, Meredith, and Sloan," on October 15th, at your Family Honors Gala. Meredith deliberately destroyed a documented artwork created by Evelyn Whitaker in 1956. The piece held both significant monetary value appraised at $18,000 and irreplaceable sentimental worth. The incident was captured on video. Physical injury resulted. The mockery that followed revealed fundamental disrespect for artistic legacy and craftsmanship. I require the following one: public acknowledgement of the destruction at the Tri-Summit Health Autumn Gala, including an apology to both me and the artistic community you disparaged. 2. Establishment of the Evelyn Whitaker Memorial Craft Scholarship, $50,000 annually for 5 years supporting emerging artists in traditional crafts. 3. Sloan's withdrawal from her scheduled speaking engagement on women's leadership in modern business at the gala, as her behavior demonstrated neither leadership nor modernity. If these conditions are not met by November 25th, the video documentation will be released publicly, and civil proceedings will commence. This is not negotiation. This is consequence. I sent it registered mail, requiring signature. My father signed for it at 11:45 a.m. On a Tuesday. The calls started within an hour. I didn't answer. The texts flooded in threats, bargains, guilt. I archived them all. Meanwhile, the exhibition took shape. Patricia secured media coverage, framing it as a dialogue about value, memory, and the destruction of heirlooms in contemporary culture. Local journalists loved the angle. 3 regional magazines requested interviews. I gave one interview, carefully controlled. This exhibition explores what happens when we assign value based solely on market worth rather than meaning. My grandmother's necklace was dismissed as cheap junk because it was handmade. But handmade means human hours of labor, years of learned skill, generations of transmitted knowledge. The interviewer asked about the destruction depicted in the exhibition materials. Sometimes things must break before we see their true value, I said. Sometimes destruction reveals more than preservation ever could. Word spread through Asheville's art community, then through the donor circles my parents inhabited. Questions arose: what destruction, what necklace? Why was Maya Whitaker, Victor's daughter, exhibiting broken jewelry as art? My mother tried calling 43 times the week before the exhibition. Sloan sent 17 emails ranging from furious to pleading. My father had his lawyer send a cease and desist that Jennifer dismissed with barely concealed amusement. "They're scared," she said. "Good. Fear means they finally understand what they've done." But I wasn't interested in their fear. I wanted their recognition public, undeniable recognition that what they'd destroyed had value, that what I created had worth, that Grandmother Evelyn's legacy meant more than their accumulated wealth. The exhibition opening was 3 days away. The Tri-Summit Gala, where they'd have to face their choice, was the same night. Every piece was in place. The board was set. Now, to watch them play a game where, for once, they didn't make the rules. The family's counteroffensive began at 7:20 a.m. on November 25th, 3 days before the exhibition. My father arrived unannounced at my studio, flanked by 2 lawyers from Preston and Associates, the firm that handled the hospital's liability cases. "This ends now," he said, placing a folder on my workbench. "Sign the NDA, accept the settlement, cancel your little show." I didn't touch the folder. "How much?" $50,000. More than enough to cover your losses. The scholarship fund alone is $50,000 per year. That's extortion, Maya. That's accountability. Dad. One lawyer, a woman with steel gray hair, stepped forward. "Miss Whitaker, publishing that video constitutes defamation. Your parents' professional reputations are built on their public behavior. The video shows exactly what happened. Truth isn't defamation." My father's jaw tightened the same expression he wore during surgical complications. "You're destroying this family over jewelry. You destroyed Grandmother's legacy over image. Your grandmother would be appalled. My grandmother would understand perfectly. She faced the same dismissal from you 30 years ago." He left without another word, but the lawyers remained. They offered $75,000, then $100. I showed them the door. That afternoon, my mother called from her office. I could hear the forced calm, the CEO voice she used during hostile takeovers. "Maya, darling, let's be reasonable. The gala raises money for childhood cancer research. Would you really sabotage dying children over personal grudges? Are you really hiding behind sick kids to avoid accountability? The donors, the board they won't understand. They'll pull funding. Families depend on Tri-Summit's services." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before destroying irreplaceable property and calling it cheap junk." It was a momentary lapse. It was a pattern of behavior finally made visible. She shifted tactics. "What would it really take not these performative demands, but what you actually want? I want you to value what I do, what Grandmother did, what generations of craftspeople have done." Silence. Then, "We can't change how we feel." "Maya." "No, but you can face the consequences of showing it." The final assault came through Sloane. She appeared at my studio that evening, dressed down in jeans and a sweater her version of humble. The sunset through the industrial windows caught the tears she'd prepared for this performance. "Maya, please, this will ruin me. Nimbus will pull my contract. Everything I've worked for, everything you've worked for remains intact. You're facing consequences for your behavior, not your work." It was just a laugh. "I didn't know about the necklace, about Grandmother. You laughed at destruction. You called my work cheap junk. You've dismissed my career for 3 years. She dropped the tears, her real face emerging calculating, sharp. "You know what this is really about, jealousy. You've always resented that I succeeded in the real world while you played with your little jewelry." "The real world." I turned back to my workbench where the new pieces lay waiting for installation. "Sloane, you create nothing. You market other people's creations. You add no beauty, no function, no meaning to the world, just noise. And you call that real? At least I don't need to threaten my own family. You participated in destroying something irreplaceable and laughed about it. That's not family. That's cruelty." She tried one more angle. "If you do this, you're out. No more holidays. No more family events. No more anything. You'll be alone." "I've been alone at every family event for years. You just never noticed." After she left, I sat in my studio as darkness fell. 3 voices, 3 attempts to make me fold. My mentor from the Craft Guild, Eleanor, called as I was locking up. "Heard you've got the whole arts district talking," she said. Also heard the Whitakers are pulling every string they have. Let them pull. You sure about this, these people? They play rough when cornered. They already played rough. They just didn't expect me to play back. What you're doing, it's not revenge. You know, it's revelation, showing people who they really are. Is there a difference? Eleanor laughed. Revenge would be destroying something of theirs in return. You're just holding up a mirror. The fact they hate what they see. That's on them. That night, I received 17 more messages. Board members of Tri-Summit expressing concern. Society friends of my mother suggesting mediation. So, even the mayor's office delicately inquiring about potential disruptions to charitable giving. I responded to none of them. The exhibition opened in 60 hours. The gala followed immediately after. They had 36 hours to meet my terms or face themselves in public. The next morning, a final message from my father. Your mother and I have discussed it. We'll offer recognition of the necklace's value and a private apology. No public statement, no scholarship, no changes to the gala. That's our final offer. I typed back. The exhibition opens Thursday at 6 p.m. The gala begins at 9 p.m. Your choice determines what happens at both. Then I turned off my phone and got to work. There were still 3 pieces to mount, lighting to adjust, and programs to print. Whatever they decided, the show would go on. The mirror was polished and ready. Now to see if they'd look into it or shatter it trying to look away. The Tri-Summit Health Autumn Gala glowed like a jewel box. The Asheville Country Club transformed into healthcare philanthropy's cathedral. I arrived at 9:15 p.m., still wearing the dust of my exhibition's triumph, 300 attendees, 2 acquisition offers, and a review already live calling it devastating brilliance. But now I wore something else Grandmother Evelyn's necklace, reborn. I'd spent 40 hours creating it, using kintsugi philosophy with Western metalworking. The shattered glass was held in delicate gold veins, the cracks preserved but transformed into design elements. The chipped diamond sat proud in its damage, catching light differently now, fracturing rainbows where it once threw clean sparkles. The ballroom doors opened to 500 guests, autumn orchids climbing columns, champagne flowing like liquid gold. I found my assigned family table, front and center, where everyone could see us, where everyone could see them. Maya. My mother's voice could have frozen champagne. That's not funny. It's not meant to be. She saw the necklace and went pale. My father's hand moved to her elbow, steady her or restrain her. I couldn't tell. Sloane stared like she was calculating distance to exits. The MC took the podium at 9:30 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin our program, the Ashridge Museum has provided a brief presentation about their new exhibition on regional craft heritage. My parents exchanged confused looks. This wasn't on their program, but the museum was a major donor, they couldn't object. The lights dimmed, the screen illuminated. First slide, Grandmother Evelyn at her workbench, young and determined, creating the original necklace. Her hands steady, her focus absolute. Second slide. The technical drawings she'd submitted for her guild certification, showing the revolutionary glass suspension technique. Third slide. The original appraisal documents, establishing provenance and value. Fourth slide. A photograph from 3 hours ago. The Shattered Not Cheap exhibition. Crowds surrounding the reconstructed pieces. Then, without warning, the video. Not the full destruction. Jennifer had edited it to 30 seconds of devastating clarity. My mother's hand shooting out, the necklace snapping, the pendant exploding against marble. Sloane's laughter, crisp through the country club's premium sound system, cheap junk. The room stopped breathing. Final slide. The restored necklace. Tonight. Around my neck. Text appeared. Value isn't determined by those who destroy, but by those who create. The lights returned. 500 faces turned toward our table. The MC, a consummate professional, smoothly continued. The Whitaker family has long been synonymous with philanthropy and community values. But nobody was listening to him anymore. They were watching us. Watching my mother's mask crack, my father's surgical composure fail, Sloane's branded confidence crumble. A murmur rippled through the room. Phones appeared despite the no-recording policy. The president of Tri-Summit's board leaned over to whisper urgently to his wife. Major donors exchanged glances. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping. There's been a misunderstanding. But the MC had already introduced her for her speech. She had to walk to the podium, had to face 500 people who'd just watched her destroy an heirloom and call it trash. "Good evening," she began, her voice barely steady. "Tri-Summit Health believes in preserving what matters." Someone coughed. Another person whispered. The parallel was too obvious, too damaging. She faltered, searching for words that wouldn't sound like hypocrisy. My father tried to save it, moving to join her. "What you've seen requires context." "We saw the context," someone called from the back. It was quite clear. The board president stood. "Perhaps we should take a brief intermission." But I stood too, the necklace catching the chandelier light, throwing fractured rainbows across the ceiling. I didn't move to the podium. I didn't need to. My voice carried perfectly in the acoustically designed space. Grandmother Evelyn taught me that metal has memory. When you break it, it remembers. When you repair it, that memory becomes part of its story. Tonight, I wear both the breaking and the repairing. The question is, what will you remember? I walked toward the exit, unhurried. Behind me, voices exploded, board members demanding explanations, donors questioning commitments, society photographers suddenly interested in capturing the Whitakers' faces instead of their poses. At the door, I turned back. My family stood isolated in the center of the chaos they'd created, their carefully constructed image shattered as thoroughly as the necklace had been. But I'd rebuilt my necklace. They'd have to rebuild themselves if they could figure out how to create rather than destroy. The last thing I heard before the doors closed was the board president's voice. "I think we need to discuss the scholarship fund Mrs. Whitaker will be establishing. Tonight." Outside, the November air tasted clean and sharp. My phone buzzed with messages from the exhibition 3 museums interested in acquisitions, a documentary filmmaker wanting to discuss the story, clients who'd seen the coverage placing orders. I didn't read them all. Instead, I touched the reconstructed necklace, feeling the veins of gold holding the broken glass, the damaged diamond that now threw light in entirely new directions. Grandmother Evelyn had been right. Metal has memory. But more importantly, people have choices to break or to build, to dismiss or to value, to destroy or to transform. Tonight, in the space they valued most, before the audience they couldn't dismiss, my family had been forced to face their choice. The necklace around my throat wasn't just repaired. It was proof that broken things could become more beautiful, more valuable, more truthful than their original form. And everyone who mattered had seen it happen. The ballroom erupted behind me, but I didn't look back. The valet brought my car, and I drove straight to Hearth and Hammer, where the exhibition's aftermath still lingered: empty wine glasses, gallery cards, the ghost of 300 people who'd witnessed art born from destruction. My phone vibrated constantly. I set it aside and began cleaning up, methodically washing glasses, straightening displays. The work steadied me, the same way shaping metal always had. At 10:45 p.m., Jennifer arrived with a tablet and a grin. "The board president just sent this, a digitally signed document." The Whitaker family would establish the Evelyn Whitaker Memorial Craft Scholarship, $50,000 annually for 5 years. The press release would go out Monday. My mother had stepped down from her gala speaking role, citing personal reflection needed on family values. Sloane had withdrawn from her leadership panel. "And," Jennifer added, "there's a formal apology being drafted. They want to approve it with you before it goes public." "I don't need to approve it," They need to mean it. At 11:30 p.m., a knock at the studio door. I expected lawyers, maybe reporters who'd tracked me down. Instead, my father stood alone in the drizzle, looking older than his 62 years. "May I come in?" I let him enter. He studied the exhibition pieces still on display, the brooch with the damaged diamond, the series of small sculptures incorporating the glass dust, the photographs documenting transformation. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said finally. "The technique, the execution, it's masterful. She'd be proud I stood up to you." He nodded slowly. "That too." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small wrapped package. "This was in our safety deposit box. Your grandmother left it for you. But your mother thought, well, she thought you should wait until you were more established." Inside was another of grandmother's pieces, a ring with the same glass suspension technique. This one intact. Perfect. "She made this for you before you were born," he said. "She knew, somehow, that you'd be the one to continue her work. Not continue. Transform. Yes." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your mother wants to apologize. Genuinely. And Sloan. She's questioning everything right now. Maybe that's good. Maybe. The scholarship will make it permanent, not just 5 years, and we'll name the craft center at the community college after Evelyn." I looked at him, this man who'd saved thousands of lives but couldn't see the value in his own mother's creations until forced to face their destruction. "It's a start," I said. After he left, I sat alone in my studio until 1 a.m., wearing both pieces, now the reconstructed necklace and the perfect ring. 2 stories: what was broken and remade, what was preserved and passed on. My phone showed hundreds of messages. The exhibition had sold out. 3 documentary producers wanted meetings. The Smithsonian had inquired about acquiring the entire Shattered Not Cheap collection. But the message that mattered most came from a young woman who'd attended the exhibition. "I'm 17, and my parents want me to study business. But tonight, seeing your work, hearing your story, I understand now that creating beauty isn't less than creating profit. Thank you for showing me it's okay to choose art." I walked to the window where city lights reflected off the French Broad River. Somewhere across town, my family was facing questions, consequences, revelations. The gala had likely ended in chaos, donors demanding answers, the board requiring accountability. They'd rebuild their image eventually. They were too powerful, too connected not to recover. But they'd never again dismiss someone's work as cheap junk without remembering this night, without remembering how it felt when their own values were held to the light and found wanting. I returned to my workbench, pulled out fresh silver wire. There was a commission due Monday: wedding bands for a couple who'd seen my work at the exhibition. They wanted something that showed history, endurance, the beauty of things that last. The studio was quiet except for the rain against windows and the soft hiss of the soldering torch. I began to work, shaping metal that would remember every hammer strike, every moment of heat and pressure. By 3 a.m., the basic forms were complete. I held them up to the light, 2 circles of silver, simple and strong, ready to be refined and polished and worn for decades. Grandmother Evelyn had been right about metal having memory, but she'd also been right about something else, something she'd told me the last time I saw her. "They'll try to make you small. Maya. They'll call your work lesser because it comes from your hands instead of a factory, your heart instead of a boardroom. But remember, the things that last, the things that matter, are always made by people who refuse to be made small." I touched the reconstructed necklace one last time, feeling the gold veins holding the broken pieces together, stronger now than before. Then I got back to work, creating something new from raw materials, adding beauty to the world one piece at a time. The Whitaker name might mean power and wealth to everyone else. But to me, it would always mean this: the woman at the workbench at 3 a.m, transforming metal and memory into something that couldn't be broken, even if they tried, especially if they tried. Thank you so much for listening to Maya's story of standing up for what truly matters. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on family, value, and what we choose to preserve or destroy. Your perspectives make these stories richer for everyone.